A few terms that you should know on here. We got the landlord, we got the tenant, and the lease. The landlord is the person who owns the property. Okay, now the other thing that maybe you should put behind, did I put lessor behind landlord on your thing? Okay, and the reason I did that is no one calls them lessor and lessees except for the law. You know what I mean? It's always landlord, tenant stuff. However, when you're reading through South Dakota laws, it will use the terms lessor and lessee. And it's easy to get those confused on there, so I put those on there. I'm not going to use the term in this class, lessor and lessee. I'm going to use landlord and tenant because that's the typical term. However, when you're going to be going through a packet of information, okay, and what I did is I just copied and pasted South Dakota laws dealing with landlord and tenant stuff. And they will use the term lessor and lessee. So that's why I put that there. Okay, the tenant is the person who is renting the apartment. So if I own the apartment or house, whatever it is, and I'm renting it out to you, I'm the landlord, you're the tenant. And the lease is just a contract for housing. Okay, any rental contract, at least rental contract for a house is known as a lease. If you're renting land, that's a lease too, so maybe it's for real property. But certainly if you're renting a house, that's what we call it, is a lease. Just, again, vocab words that you should know. All right. The other thing that's kind of important, and actually here's a picture, but we'll look at a similar one later. This is a typical lease. And if you notice, it's only, I cut off the signature stuff on the bottom, but it's about 2 pages long. It's not a hard read. It has a lot of things defined. Remember, as we looked at credit card contracts last week, it's probably important to read through anything in the credit card contract so you know what you're getting into. Same thing for a lease. If you're signing a lease, especially a year-long lease, isn't it important that you know everything that you're agreeing to? So before you sign a lease, excuse me, read it. Read the contract. No, it's not that hard to do. And typically, this is what they look like. I mean, this is a pretty average-looking one. All right, there are 2 types of tenancy. One tenancy is called a tenancy for years. And the tenancy for years is just a year-long lease. Tenancy for years is the year-long lease where we have a predetermined termination date, which means you know when the lease is going to end. And I'm going to put some stuff, normally I'd put it maybe on the whiteboard here, but I'm going to put it on the next slide so you can see it when they're watching the lecture later. So I'll give you all these and then I'll give you kind of an example here. A tenancy for years, you know when the termination date is. You also know that all terms are set for that time. They say all terms are set. Neither party, neither the landlord nor the tenant, can make any changes to that after the contract is signed. But, as always, any contract can be changed if both parties want to. However, very seldom, so we can keep that in mind. So when I say neither party can change any, neither party independently can make any changes to this contract. Okay, and that's kind of true on all contracts. Okay, so here's a contract that's made. The terms are set. Neither party can change anything. It's kind of nice, and we need to look at the pros and cons of both a tenancy for years and a periodic tenancy. But let's just use this example. Let's say that you make a contract, and that contract is from, let's see, May 1 of 2015 to April. 30 days in April 2016. Okay, and you're paying $1,000 a month rent due on first of the month. So you're making 12 payments. It's going to cost you $1,200 to rent this place. Now that can't change. Okay, so on May 1st, there's $1,000. Okay. June 1st, you have to pay $1,000. Okay, pretty straightforward, right? And now, here's the other thing you need to realize is that you're bound by this for 12 months, meaning that let's say after 6 months you realize that this apartment is not to your liking. You want to move somewhere else? you're still bound by it. Can you move out? Absolutely. You don't have to live there, but you still owe that money. You made a contract with that landlord. You promised that landlord that you are going to pay them $1,000 a month, the first of each month for the next 12 months. In exchange, they're going to provide you with a place that we'll talk about later. It's fit for human habitation, but they're going to provide you with a place. Just because you decide to move out doesn't get you out of that contract. They're still providing their end of the contract. You just aren't there. Okay? Now, this happens a lot year-long leases. A landlord can decide. If I'm the landlord, it's my decision if I want to offer a year-long lease or a monthly lease. If you know that, let's say you're going off to the military, and you're going off in September, and you want to move out of your parents' house, and you want to have an apartment for a while. So you get an apartment in Sioux Falls. That's fine, but if you sign a year-long lease, when you're in the military in September and October and November and December and so on, you still owe $1,000 a month if it's my place to me every month. And if you don't pay, the landlord will sue you. And will they win? Yeah, you made an agreement. It's a contract for that. Okay, and there's not a heck of a lot you can do. There is subleasing. We'll talk about that on another day. But there's not much you can do. You can request the landlord lets you out of that contract. And they may say, sure, but why would they? You know, I got a deal that you're going to pay me $1,000 a month. Why would I say, okay, you can get out of it? Now, I might, if I got people lining up and really wanting this place, I might say to Logan, all right, I'll let you out of your contract because I got a lot of people who want this place. You know, I can find a suitable replacement. However, if I don't, and you're bound by it. Now, let's say that you move out. I can't rent it to anybody else either because it's still your apartment. Even if you're not living there, it's yours, and I can't rent it to somebody else. If I do, then I've just rented the same apartment to two people. I violated my end of the contract, and you can read in laws, when we look through the packet, what can happen there. The other thing that South Dakota state law says is that, let's say Logan leaves, I gotta advertise it the same way I advertised it before. So if it was a sign in the front yard, that's what I gotta do. And if I find a suitable replacement, then I can rent it to that suitable replacement. But if it takes me 4 months to find a suitable replacement, then you owe those 4 months rent. And if I never find a suitable replacement, you owe me $1,000 a month until this time. Okay, so the pros, what's the good thing about a year-to-year lease, a tenancy for years? Let's look at it from the tenant's point of view. From your point of view, what's a pro about this contract? Your rent's never going to go up. You know that. You know, you got that fixed amount of rent. You know what it is. What else? Not necessarily. I wouldn't say yes or no to that statement. Other positive about it. You got a guaranteed place to live for the next 12 months. It's not going to be, hey, do I got to find new housing and so on. We also know that nothing else can change. When we say nothing else can change, whatever the terms of the lease are. I can't change that. I want my payments now on the 15th instead of the 1st. Okay? Or if we sign in this contract that says a year-long lease and it is it's my responsibility as a landlord to mow the lawn and shovel the sidewalk. Okay? And let's say halfway through I said, you know what, you should be doing that. The contract says that I do it. It's my responsibility. You know, on the upkeep or, lawn and those kind of things. And if you're renting a house, those are kind of things that, those are questions you got to answer. Whose responsibility is it to mow the lawn? And if you don't have a lawnmower, you don't want that responsibility. And it depends on, it's whatever I put in the lease. If I take care of all of my property, let's say I have 3 houses and I mow and do all that, then that will be in the lease. But it may also be in the lease, it's your responsibility. Without a doubt. It could anyway, because there'll be a security deposit. But verbal contracts on a year-long lease, if it's a year-long lease and the contract in South Dakota says must be in writing, right? That was one of the situations when the contract must be in writing. So that takes precedence over anything else. And anyway, any verbal thing is not real. Even if you don't need it in writing, we got this in writing that says no pets. We got a verbal thing that says you can have pets. Which one do you think is going to be more likely to be upheld in court? This is proof right here. The verbal thing is my word against yours. You can say, hey, you said I could have a pet. I said, no, I never said that. How do you prove that? And maybe you can. Maybe you got it recorded. But this contract still is better than anything written, anything verbal. Okay, so that's one type of contract, or one type of lease. Another one is a periodic tenancy. These are the two most common. The periodic tenancy is a month-to-month. Now, you could probably get a periodic tenancy, which is 6 weeks to 6 weeks, or 6 weeks, or 2 weeks to 2 weeks, but they would be rare. So the two that we need to understand are periodic, year to year, and tenancy for years, which is year for year, and periodic is month to month. Now, this one's a little more complicated. Okay, first of all, there's no predetermined termination date. You don't necessarily know when this contract ends. Just because it's a month-long lease doesn't mean that you're only going to live there for a month. It could be ongoing, month-long, renewed every month, over and over and over. So it could be you stay there for 5 years, or you can stay there for 1 month. But you don't know looking into the contract itself. All terms are subject to change with 1 month's notice. Now, I'll explain this here in a little bit. But all terms on the lease are subject to change, including are they going to rent to you? Anything on that lease is only good for a month. Okay, you remember we said it was $1,200 or $1,000 a month. You knew that in May you're paying $1,000, in September you're going to pay $1,000, in December you're going to pay $1,000. Not on a periodic tenancy. Okay, those numbers could change. The same notice must be given to notify the lease, or to terminate the lease. Meaning that a 1 month's notice is required to terminate that lease. Again, I'll explain this with an example here in a second. And then lastly, and I'll explain this too, if a landlord gives notice to modify the lease, then the tenant only has to give a 2 weeks notice, 15-day notice to terminate the lease. And I'll explain all of that. All that stuff is kind of important on the periodic tenancy. Okay, so what exactly does all this mean? So let's say that we have a lease and it's a month-long lease. Okay, so, and we'll just go with May, June, July, August, September. Okay, and let's say you're paying $1,000 a month. So you've made a 1 month long lease. If the landlord, let's say me, I want to raise the rent, I can do so, but I got to give you a 1 month's notice. Okay, so if I tell you on May 15th that I want to raise the rent, I can in June. I haven't, and we'll assume that your payments are due in the first of every month. Okay, that's in our lease here. Okay, I can't raise it in the 1st of June. Okay, it's still got to be $1,000. But if I tell you May 15th I'm going to raise the rent, it's got to be at least a 30-day notice on here. So I can tell you that in July I'm going to raise up $1,200 a month. June still has to be here because I didn't tell you. I got to tell you before the 1st of June to move it up in July. I got to tell you before the 1st of May if I'm going to move it up in June. Right? And I tell you in the 1st of June that in August it's going to be $1,300. I tell you in the 1st of July it's going to be $1,400. Again, they can continue to change, and landlords typically don't, But what I'm saying is you're not set. As long as you have a 30-day notice, they can change any part of the lease, including if they're going to rent to somebody else. So I'm renting to Maddie. But let's say Maddie's with me, and let's not change anything. Let's say that these are all $1,000. We'll go back to here. Okay, they're all $1,000 a month, and I'm renting to Maddie, and it's May. and June, and I decide that I want to rent to somebody else. I'd rather rent to Cody. I don't like Maddie anymore for whatever reason. I don't even have to give a reason. Our lease is a 1-month lease. Okay, so now I decide that in August I want to start renting to Cody. I got to give her a 1 month's notice. If I don't give her a 1 month's notice, if I don't tell her till July 15th or 20th or whatever, then she still gets August. But in September, I can rent to somebody else. The landlord, any terms can change essentially with a 1 month's notice. The same goes with you. Okay, let's say that Brandon's living in this apartment, and he knows that he's going to be moving out, the 1st of October because he's going off to the military or something. He needs to tell me a month in advance. And he can tell me as soon as he moves in, or if, what I say, 1st of October you're moving out, so then the 1st of September, before September, you need to tell him, hey, I'm out. What happens if you don't? Then you got to pay the next month's rent. That's what the law says. So if you forget, and it's, September 8th, he says, oh, by the way, I'm moving out 1st of October. Law says, you didn't give him enough notice. You may have to, you'll be required to pay the next month's rent. Okay, and if you don't pay the next month's rent, could they sue you and win? Yes. Now, the other changes, remember it said it was a 15-day thing? That's as long as everything stays the same. That's how it is. Okay, so let's say that, again, the landlord tells you, let's say you're paying $1,000 a month rent. $1,000 here, they tell you the 1st of June that in July it's going up to $1,200. Okay, now, the way the law is written without this little exception is that you would have to then tell them immediately, right? You have to give a 30-day notice if you're moving out. But the exception it says is if the landlord or one of the parties made some kind of change, and in this case the change is or moving rent up starting here, you only have to give a 15-day notice. So basically it's giving you 15 days to make up your mind. Can you find another place? That's the only time you don't have to give a 1 month's notice is if some change is made, and then you only have to give a 15-day notice at least for that next month. That make sense? Okay? Yeah. Then that's more than a 1 month's notice. You can say that all you want, but you're paying for a month's rent. Make whatever agreement you want to make with them, but you got to pay your rent. You can figure out however you want to pay it. You can pay it in advance if they'll take it in advance, which I'm sure they would. But you still owe that month's rent. Even if you're moving out on the 15th, you're making a month-long agreement. Okay, so you have rented this place for a month in exchange for this amount of money. If you move out halfway through, even if you let them know months in advance, I doubt if they're going to say. They certainly don't have to, and I doubt if they would say you only have to pay half of the month's rent. You're renting it for a month. Right, now, pros and cons of a periodic tenancy. Okay, let's go with the cons first. The cons for you are, for the tenant, is the rent can change. Things can change on there with just simply a 1 month's notice. Okay, so maybe you can afford $1,000 a month rent, but you can't afford $1,100. Well, that rent may change. Okay, so anything can change. That's probably the biggest con to it. Okay, the biggest pro on your side is you're not bound to it. You're only bound for really 30 days. Okay, so you don't have the security. Actually, not only that rent can change, it also you may not have a place to live. The pros for it on your point of view is that you're not bound in that contract for a year. If you live there for 3 months, you find out that it's not a great place to live, or you can find a cheaper place or a better place somewhere else, then you can get out of that contract. I mean, so you're not bound by it, and that's probably the biggest pro to it. Now, if you go off to college or whatever and you're getting an apartment, you don't have a whole lot of say. If I'm the landlord, both are legal leases. You can say, I would like a month-to-month lease. I can say, you know what? I only give year-long leases. Take it or leave it. And sometimes it stinks. In college towns, like I say a college town, think of a town like SDSU or Vermilion, where a lot of kids, a lot of the town is college students, or at least a big chunk of it. They almost always offer year-long leases because let's say that all of your desks are, let's say, apartments in my building. Okay, well, in the summer, I know a lot of you guys are going to be gone. You're going back to your hometowns and you're going to work there. I don't want all these empty. I don't want them empty in June, July, and August. So I don't want to not make money off them. So I'm renting you an apartment, but I'm giving you a year-long lease. So it doesn't make any difference to me if you're there or not. I'm still going to be getting money. I'm still going to get some money on each of those apartments on June, July, and August because it's a year-long lease. You don't always have much say in it, which kind of lease you get. Either way, those are the two most common. They're pros and cons to both. Any other questions on either of those two types of lease? Make sure we understand them. I think when you start getting houses or apartments, things are going to come up. All right, now the rest of the stuff, or the vast majority of the rest of the stuff that is in your note guide here, we can find in the South Dakota law site. But because we don't have access to a computer in here, and I thought this would be simpler, I just went and copied and pasted all the South Dakota laws and just put them on a packet form. So these are exactly how they're written in the South Dakota law site. The only thing that I did to make them simpler is I gave them a heading. These headings are not found in the law. So I underlined, like, when does a lease need to be in writing, and covenant of quiet enjoyment, and security deposit. And there's more than one on security deposit found in different parts in here. So I just labeled them essentially to make them a little simpler for you. What you need to do, and you can work in groups, I don't care, this is your notes. But you need to go through and find the notes here. But don't just find them. You need to understand them. And that's kind of important because we're testing on this stuff. This is half the test is next week. And if you don't understand it, you need to reread it again. You need to ask questions. But don't just, all right, I'll just copy this down, but I don't get what it means. And some of the things are longer and more complicated. But I figure I don't need to summarize this for you. When it comes down to reading these laws again, you may forget what the laws are, but you guys are smart enough that you'll remember, hey, I know there's laws on this. We've studied this before. I can't remember the details, but you guys are smart enough to go to that South Dakota law site and read those laws, right? But at that time, you're going to have to interpret them yourself. So I want you to be doing this for these. If it doesn't, on your packet, if it doesn't have an asterisk beside it, you won't find it in this packet. There's a couple things in there that I will summarize, but I'm not going to do it today. If there's no asterisks on here, and there's only a couple, they are not found in here, and it says that right on the thing too. You can't take these. I need these. So if you don't get done in class today, don't worry about it. You won't get done. I'll give you a little bit of time tomorrow. If you don't get done at the time I give you tomorrow, then you have the whole South Dakota Law website that you can use. It's chapter 43-32-6. It says right in here. I think you'll get done in the time I give you. But questions? Don't split them up. You can work together, but you can't split them up. You can't say, I'll do this first one, you do the second one, I'll do the third. I don't want you doing that. I'm going to give you enough time to get this done as long as you're not, wasting your time. But I want you to read each of those. It won't take you that long. Some are harder to interpret. You can discuss those out, or you can work by yourself.